Welcome to the Pol-Economic podcast. Can you just give a brief introduction of yourself before we start?
Sure. So my name is Mary Ellen Simoni. I was born in California, attended university in New York, came back to California and started my career at Stanford University in Palo Alto, and then spent most of my life actually abroad. So I moved to France back in 1997 with Stanford, where I was in charge of their Alumni Relations and Development program at first, and then I moved into doing undergraduate admissions for Stanford for a number of years, and then moved to Dubai in 2010, and I started Ivy Options, which is a university admissions consulting firm, back in 2012.
So that's really interesting. So obviously in your career you've been to many places and had experiences, as you said, in Stanford and also in France. So I wanted to ask you, can you share a moment from your career, either at Stanford or with this French business school, specifically consortium that you were at, that has influenced shaping your perspective on international admissions and sort of the career that you're involved in currently?
Sure. So when I was working at Stanford, it was really interesting because I was in charge of all of Europe, and so it was really interesting to try to look at kids coming from different countries and especially from different curricula. So I would be working with French baccalaureate students and US curriculum students and British A-level students and German Abitur and others. And so it was really interesting to try to assess sort of who a student was within the context of their school and their country and their experiences. And I think that prepared me really well for Dubai, where kids are taking all sorts of different curricula and have different kind of contexts that universities are going to be looking at. So that was a good I didn't know it at the time, but I think that was a really good preparation for what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and would you say that it was sort of like the diversity in terms of both schools, educational systems, but then also countries that translated into Dubai, seeing as it's the number one cosmopolitan city in the world?
Definitely. So just as an example, when I would read an application coming from a French student in France, we knew that the teacher recommendations were going to be very harsh generally, so they're not super enthusiastic, and so we had to read them in that context and sort of with that frame of mind in mind. And I think that helped a lot when I came to Dubai to help students try to assess, within their school system or the applications they were going to be presenting, what would admissions officers be looking for and what would they be expecting, given the different curricula that kids are doing here.
And obviously college admissions is something that's cumulatively changing, and it's something that's always going to be there as a constant. So I wanted to say, given this evolving landscape in the college admissions industry, how has Ivy Options specifically adapted its strategy to maintain a high success rate for clients in terms of getting into the universities that they desire?
Sure. So it actually has changed a lot. I mean, when I started working at Stanford, I remember that we had just that year gone below 25% acceptance rate, and everybody thought that was absolutely insane. And now it's 3% acceptance rate. So it definitely has gotten harder. I think students are sending a lot more applications, and especially Dubai kids, they're interested in the world. So we send a lot of applications, not just to the US and UK, but to Canada, to Europe, to Asia, to Australia. So it's really interesting just to see how, I guess, student interest in those different countries has shifted over time. We definitely saw during the pandemic, kids pulled back from North America and were much more interested in Europe. Now we're seeing sort of a return back to high interest in North America. But I think you're lucky because the world is truly your oyster.
Yeah, and you said that the acceptance rate dropped significantly from 25% to 3%. So do you think this competitive nature and all of these different firms such as Ivy Options, with more of these industries that are focused on the college admissions process?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely that's a part of it. It's just a much more competitive process than it was when I was applying to university and when most of our clients' parents were applying to university. Back then maybe we would submit 3 to 5 applications. and now kids, it's not uncommon for students to submit 12 or 15 or more applications. But I think it's also that, especially when you're looking at different country systems, it's really important to understand what each country and each individual university values. So for example, universities in Europe and in the UK, because students are applying for a specific course and they can't change that course once they're in the university, you really have to prove that you have investigated that course very extensively and that you've done a lot of preparation in terms of the classes you take and the books that you read and the internship experiences that you have. Whereas for the US and a little bit for Canada, they're much more just interested in your general intellectual curiosity, because in the US, 80% of kids will change their major at least once. So you might think you want to be an economics and political science major, but you might get there and take an amazing archaeology class and completely change. And in the US, that's just fine. So I think understanding what each university and each system is going to value is really important.
So obviously, like, a common theme of what we've talked about so far has been diversity in terms of the international aspect of the process. So you have had like a lot of experience in these international environments and in very like diverse environments in terms of education. So I wanted to say, given your extensive network in terms of the international university admissions, how does IB options like cater to the needs of these international students aiming for these very competitive universities?
So I think part of it is that our staff is really diverse. So we have people not just from the US, but from the UK, from Russia, from abroad, and people who've lived abroad for much of their life as well. So we really understand what different country systems value and appreciate. And then, I think just working with international students over these past 10 or 12 years, so much of it comes down to helping them figure out which country and which specific universities are going to be really places where they would thrive. And so we talk so much about fit, but I think fit is actually really important for kids to think about when they're crafting their university list, because in many cases there will be a university that's fantastic, but it might not be the right university for you. So I always give the example for just for instance of the Ivy League. I get a lot of kids who say, I want to go to an Ivy League university, but if you look at Princeton and what they want from their students, they're very engaged and involved in research, and every kid has to do a research project in their second year at Princeton, and then they have to do a full thesis in their fourth year, and that may not be what actually appeals to every student.
And do you think now there's like less of a prioritization on like what university fits you and more on focus of like the name of the university and the legacy that it has?
I think yes. Probably anywhere outside of a country, it's just natural and normal that you know fewer of the names, and so parents especially, they may have a short subset of names that they know and are comfortable with. But my message is always, there are over 4,000 universities in the US alone, so there are a lot of really great universities that may just not be quite as well known as the 10 names that come to everybody's mind.
Yeah. So in terms of your experience yet again, so you have a lot of skill sets, like not only in the university admissions process, but also in nonprofit work, philanthropy, and fundraising. So I wanted to ask how all of these experiences also shape your approach to admissions consulting and how it enriches or differentiates IB options from other admissions companies.
So I think my career experiences have all been essentially, if you boil it down, they're all about people and creating, meaningful relationships with people. And I think that's what's so important about the admissions consulting business too, is that, we're helping you as a student to kind of craft the most authentic, most, genuine applications that you can. And in order to do that, we really have to get to know you and who you are and what matters to you. And so I think my early experiences with fundraising, with philanthropy, have helped me to create meaningful relationships with individuals and kind of get to the root of what they want and why, and that's made me more effective. And the same for the rest of our staff. I think most of our counselors, have 10 or 20 or more years of experience, and so they're able to create really good relationships with students.
Yeah. And when you talk about like having, conversations with people and building that relationship with the client, would you also say that the parents are an important part of the process?
For sure. I mean, that's where there's always a balance, because in the end, this process should be driven by the students, but the parents are definitely an important part of the process, because in the end, they know you as a student better than you probably know yourself. Yeah. And they're going to be paying for it in the end. So their preferences and opinions are really important. And so I think kind of balancing that need for the student to independently drive the admissions process, and for parents to still feel like they have a say and really understand what's happening throughout the process. That's definitely an important balance to strike.
So in the beginning of the interview, you were mentioning the fact that you were a dual US-French citizen. So given this and the fact that you have a comprehensive understanding of admissions practices across a variety of regions, the UK, Europe, the US, etc. So how do you navigate the nuanced differences when advising students and sort of come to an intersection between them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we often start by asking students, to imagine themselves 10 years from now and think about, where in the world would you like to live? What do you imagine doing? And then we work backwards from there to get to the present day. And the usefulness of that is just, obviously, if you're thinking that you hope to live and work in France 10 years from now, then looking at French universities or universities that are well known and well respected in those countries or regions will be more important. So I would say that has helped. And then thinking about things like, obviously European schools are a really great value for money. So if you're part of a family that maybe has a lot of kids, or where finances are going to be a big part of the decision-making process, we talk about that very early on. For students who really are 100% sure of what they want, the UK can be a great option, but for students who have no idea, they may find it very difficult to settle on a course, as a 16-year-old in high school. And that might mean that the US or Canada will be a better fit because it has greater flexibility. So we really try to dig into all of those elements as well.
So in that way, do you feel like university is sort of like an integral foundation to your life?
I think if it should be, one of the biggest transformational experiences of your life, if you approach it the right way and look at it as an opportunity to kind of find out who you are, and not just what you want to do. Definitely.
Yeah. So last question I want to ask, what is one personality trait you believe is essential for anyone that's considering a career in this area in terms of being an advisor?
Well, I think it's not a personality trait, but I think you have to love teenagers. I have 3 kids of my own, and they're not teenagers anymore, but I really love working with kind of 13 to 18-year-olds because I feel like this is such a growth period in your life, so it's an exciting time. But I would say probably the most important personality trait is genuine curiosity, like just wanting to learn about other people and understand kind of what makes them tick and find out their stories, because those are such important parts of the application process.
Yeah. And you said that, 13 to 18, obviously it's a growth period. So do you think having a counselor that's a good fit for you is sort of going to shape the person that you ultimately become?
Hopefully. Yes, we see our role as much more than just helping you get into university. I think if it's done well, we should be creating relationships where we're helping you to kind of navigate this period, which is an exciting and stressful and anxiety producing period. So our job is to try to make it as smooth and stress-free as it can possibly be.
All right, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it.
Great to see you. Thanks so much for having me.